Hey folks, David Stewart here. Some big news today. Carmelo Anthony was convicted of the murder of Austin Metcalf. This happened up in the Dallas area in Frisco. And this has been an interesting event for a whole lot of reasons. There's been a lot of racial controversy over the event, with sides being drawn, kind of how you would expect, with a large contingent of, say, race grifters backing up Carmelo and just going full support behind him in getting off of this charge. And everybody else looking at this and going, how did this go to trial? And that seemed to be the big sentiment that I've seen since the verdict was announced. Was people were actually kind of dumbfounded looking at everything, like, how did this go to trial? It seemed like such a slam dunk case. The jury didn't really deliberate long at all. They were given options to select lesser charges, including manslaughter, and they deliberated, I think, for less than 3 hours and came back with a guilty verdict, and he was sentenced to 35 years in prison. There was video, there was numerous witnesses. This is not a thing that would normally go to trial. So the question is, why did this go to trial? And the answer is because him and his family were paid to make it go to trial. They raised over $600,000, probably more as time has gone on, in order to provide for a defense. They did hire a private defense attorney. That was Mike Howard in the Dallas area. It was not a public defender. So people on the internet saying like that his family blew all the money and had to get a public defender. There was, I think, like an early hearing about needing a public defender, but that was before they raised all the money. So they were paid a lot of money, and they could use that money for other things like relocation expenses and things like that. They were paid a lot of money to bring this to trial. And I think a lot of people were hoping that he would beat the rap and it would be this explosive moment, kind of like with the O.J. Simpson trial, where you're able to kind of thumb your nose up. At least the race grifters, you can't just throw a black kid into prison just because you want to. And of course, the response to this is everybody's racist, but it's actually been a little bit tamer response than I would have expected for this. And I think that was because of how much evidence was actually presented at court and how much actually came out in this final process. Once things are finally laid on the table, it was like, this seemed like a really obvious case. I obviously was not on the jury, but as an outsider, from what I've seen, it seemed like a really obvious case. Probably Carmelo and his family knew this, but they were getting paid to actually bring it to trial. So the financial incentive was to bring it to trial so they could keep all the money. As a large portion of that, I'm sure, will get paid to the defense attorney. They can be very expensive. But another thing that this reminded me of, because people have been talking about a public defender, and although he didn't have a public defender, is if you ever talk to public defenders or lawyers who've been involved in criminal law, whether they're district attorneys, and I've had students that were district attorneys, and I've had students that were, I'm talking about like music students, like people who took guitar lessons from me that were, district attorneys, like that was their job, and you get to chit chat about them with that. And I've met people that were involved in criminal law at some point and were public defenders. And there's a certain kind of person that ends up in court that you can't seem to get a plea deal out of. The court system tends to be really overloaded, and public defenders in particular have these really high caseloads where there's just a ton of people that they have to construct a defense for and navigate them through the courts and all those, all the ins and outs of the legal system. There's a certain portion of them that want to take it to trial no matter what. They believe that they can beat the rap. And they could have a video that's like, we caught you. There's a video of you clearly beating this 70-year-old woman into the ground. And don't you care anything about what happens to her? And it's like, no, I don't care about that. And it made me think anyway of this. There was this like 4chan screen cap from a couple years ago that basically said all this. And when I remember reading it, I was like, yes, I've known attorneys that dealt with criminal law, and this is a lot of the stuff that they said that they experienced. Not all of them, but there's a certain portion of like your more ghetto defendants, let's say, who just really want to take everything to trial. They want things to go to trial. They think that they can get off. They view the trial and they view the courts as sort of like a court of wizards. That if your wizard just says the right things and does the right things and does the right spells, you can just walk out of court because your cousin somehow beat the rap, or some friend that your cousin knew, he was able to beat the rap, so you're probably going to be able to beat the rap too. And it's really awful for public defenders because they know the person's guilty. That person's still entitled to a defense, and that means if it's the wishes of the accused to go to trial, you're going to go to trial. And a lot of them will waive continuances and things like that because they have a right to a speedy trial. They're not waiving their right to a speedy trial. And so you just go to trial with whatever you can assemble in that short amount of time. And most of the time, you're just kind of wasting everybody's time and money and a bunch of jurors' time and money to present really basic evidence. It comes back with a conviction, and they're always like shocked. Meanwhile, the halls of the court are like, you run into family there because it's the same little groups of people. It's like a very small group of people, and they're all in court getting in trouble with something, hoping that they're wizards, hoping that they could say the right things to the judge, whether it's like a traffic infraction or something else. They love to go to court because they think that if they just say the right things, if they cast the right magic spell, then they'll be able to beat the rap and walk free. It's not really a thought of like, oh, I'm innocent and I'm going to take it to court. It's like, I just think I can beat the rap. That's what it really comes down to. And it's an interesting thing to think about because I don't think that this case is this. I think with Carmelo Anthony, they were really paid to do it, but I can totally see that mentality being expressed by the people who support Carmelo Anthony. They didn't seem to really care that much about whether he actually did it and whether it was really self-defense or whether it was actually murder. And the reason is because they really just wanted him to beat the rap. That's what they were interested in. They were interested in the court system producing an outcome for him that they wanted, not justice, right? Whereas being interested in justice is a little bit, I guess, a higher mind for this sort of thing. But anyway, I'm reminded of that post because it really, really rang true, and it reminded me of lots of the attorneys that I've dealt with over the years, including district attorneys, and I've known detectives, and it's like there's accused, they really want to go to trial. It doesn't matter how much evidence there is. It doesn't matter how good the plea deal is. They really want to go to trial and waste everybody's time with this sort of thing. And you're going to do it because they have a right to a trial. And so maybe this is one of those cases like it was pretty open and shut. They probably knew what was going on ahead of time. I heard that there might have been discussion of a plea deal like before going in for jury deliberations, but I don't have any confirmation on that. It just means that the defense knew it was really not going to go well. I'm sure Mike Howard did the best defense he could, given that the evidence was there. And I think he shocked a lot of people with one of the defenses, which is that basically saying that Austin impaled himself. He stabbed himself. The knife was out and Austin just impaled himself, like running him through on a sword, and tried to put that thought, because people are like, this is absurd. Well, you have to do something, right? You have to exhaust every possible explanation for your client that could introduce some amount of reasonable doubt into a juror's mind. Also interesting with the situation is that there was a diversity of races on the jury, but there were no black jurors. And I guess there were several people in the jury pool who were African American and were dismissed because they had said pretty honestly that they would have trouble convicting. Because of their biases. And that's fine. Like, if that's a fine thing to answer honestly, and that means you probably shouldn't be on that jury pool, and maybe you'd be okay on a different jury pool where your biases were not going to be part of that. Including, I think they dismissed some teachers because teachers said they'd have a hard time convicting a student, like somebody who was like a high school student of murder, right? They would want to show them some sort of mercy or things like that. And those are valid things that come out with this. A lot of people said the jury selection part of the trial, that's really where the trial was made. I would be inclined to say that I think that argument has a lot of weight, but since we've seen most of the evidence come out, it's like it seems like things were pretty much destined to go one way. And I think that's also why there's been kind of less of an intense, like, aggressive response to this from the race baiting side, because it's just so obvious this time around. There's just not really a whole lot of messaging play that you can do with it. So anyway, leave me your thoughts down below. Really interesting couple of events and a verdict. I haven't talked about it up till now because there's so much that comes out, you know. There's a temptation to be the first person to speak about an event and like maybe gobble up those views, but you're almost always going to speak inaccurately. And I probably said some inaccurate things in this video. And there's probably things that we'll learn over the next weeks or months or however long that will say something, something I said in here was inaccurate. And this plays to the reality that I talk about, that most news is false, not because they're lying, but because all the facts are not there. So the facts that you're presented with get changed. We learn new things, and that makes the original statements, the original presentation of the story, to not be accurate, to be false, right? So this is a normal thing that happens. But since it happened, I didn't want to just immediately, let's get some clicks. But it's like there's going to be a lot of things that show up as this is going on, and it's really tempting to want to race bait and to make everything political. And certainly there's a lot of people who are doing that and who are throwing money at this. And it's an unfortunate reality that a lot of money got thrown at this for political purposes. But, here we are, and now we can see most of the things that have happened and line them up and create a more coherent narrative about what was going on that day, as well as all the events that followed that up. But leave me your thoughts down below. I'd be happy to read them, and I'll check you all next time. Have a great day.